Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Monday, February 8th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 206 days. The game against Michigan is in 292 days. Those two countdowns will continue just as they have since the end of the 2020 season, but a whole lot of the rest of Ohio State's 2020 football schedule is now different than it was the last time we recorded an episode. Friday, the Big Ten announced a new schedule for its conference games, which meant a lot of matchups for this fall are going to happen on different weekends than we previously thought. My guest today is Buckeye Scoop beat reporter Tony Gerdeman. And Tony, after taking some time to go through things, this sounds weird to say, but did the Big Ten just do something smart?
Well, let's reserve judgment, but on its face, it looks like they did, at least in relation to Ohio State's schedule. But yeah, putting it out there now, getting things revised. We'd been talking in the past about what was the 2021 schedule going to look like, and would it be revised? Would they just do a bunch of home and away swapping? Will Ohio State get Michigan at home next year instead of getting skipped over, kind of like they did this year? But yeah, you look at it and there are changes, but it's pretty much the same schedule, just in a different order for most of the teams. And so, yeah, I feel like it's hard to be critical, which I'm having trouble with, Tom.
I don't know what to do with my hands. It's bizarre. Yeah, basically the gist of what happened is they kept all the same teams playing the same teams in the same locations. So all of Ohio State's scheduled road games are still scheduled road games, but a lot of them are happening at different times, different weeks. They are still opening at Minnesota on Thursday, September 2nd. They're still finishing at Michigan on Saturday, November 27th. But basically everything else in between those is different now in the conference portion of the schedule. The Oregon game, the Tulsa game, the Akron game, those are all still the same. But after that, they play at Rutgers on October 2nd. Then they're home for Maryland before they have a week off on October 16th. Then they are at Indiana on October 23rd, home for Penn State on October 30th, at Nebraska the first weekend in November, home for Purdue, home for Michigan State, and then at Michigan to close the year. The biggest thing, and I mean, there were two things that I was looking for before this came out when we got the heads up that this was coming. Number one, will they correct the really, really stupid unforced error of having Ohio State play Penn State and Michigan back-to-back at the end of the year like they did in 2019, which then resulted in a kind of rundown Ohio State team looking not super fantastic against Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game for the first half, and then losing out on the number one seed in the playoff and having to play an actual team with a pulse instead of Oklahoma in the first round of the playoff. So they did it. And it was like, oh, wow, there's actually, it seems like a level of strategic thinking here that the other conferences, the SEC does a very good job of protecting its big teams and not having them play difficult games back to back. That's why they have the SEC SoCon Challenge the weekend before rivalry week. But this is unusual to see the Big Ten do that.
It is. And I'm just looking at Ohio State's toughest stretch of games, and really the 3-game stretch of at Indiana, home against Penn State, and at Nebraska be their toughest stretch. And really, that's maybe one of their easiest tough stretches in recent years. Or is it the at Minnesota, Oregon to start the season? There's no just big stretch of, oh man, this is going to be, will they not be fortunate to get through there, but will there be a game in there if somebody comes in injured? Will it be tough? And again, I guess we should remember Justin Fields is gone. So these games do get tougher now, and they could trip up against somebody or just lose to somebody. And you look at these stretches, and yeah, they certainly did Ohio State a favor by moving Penn State up. They also did a favor for us, me and you, Tom, because we were both looking forward to Minnesota. And then when they're talking about moving it, then you're terrified. I want to go to Minnesota in September. I don't want to go to Minnesota in November. And the first thing that I was looking for was, well, first the Michigan game. Let's just see, and then the second is, where is that Minnesota game? When is it? And fortunately, they didn't move it. It's still a Thursday, and I'm looking forward to that one now, as opposed to if it was, say, November 20th, I don't know how much I'd be looking forward to it.
Yeah, September 2nd in Minnesota when the Twins have a home baseball series that week against the Cubs. That's like, oh man, what an appealing trip that is. That's the perfect time to go to Minnesota. And then, I think we all remember the 2014 Minnesota game with Kerry Combs and short sleeves, and the kickoff temperature was about 14 degrees. And no, thank you. I will, as someone who would potentially be outside shooting photos for that game, hard pass. Thank you very much. So, yes, that was the second thing. I mentioned the Penn State game being the first thing I was interested in seeing. That was the second thing. That all worked out just fine. Now I think there's obviously you're going to have, the Big Ten is just looking out for looking out for Ohio State again. But if you go through the schedule, like everyone basically has this set up with a little bit more of a logical flow to their schedule, where you don't have incredibly difficult game stacked right next to an incredibly difficult game. Michigan, for example, has they have Washington week 2, and then they have Northern Illinois and Rutgers before they have to go to Wisconsin. They have back-to-back road games against Wisconsin and Nebraska. Nebraska is really not projected to be very good next year. So, and then after a bye week, they get Northwestern. So they've got a bye week before one of their tough cross-divisional games. Then they go to Michigan State. They do have Indiana and Penn State back-to-back. Ohio State has that as well. So that's not, Indiana is all of a sudden you got to kind of include them in your calculus of potentially good teams in the East. But then they have a week between Penn State and Ohio State. They get Maryland. So they don't have a terrible back-to-back there. They've really, Penn State has Indiana and at Iowa back-to-back, but that's about as tough as their back-to-backs get. There's not a really brutal, like, why are you doing this to that team? Really anywhere in the conference. That's something I've written about this for a couple of years now. I talked to the guy who did the Big Ten scheduling early 2020, and I talked to the guy who did the SEC scheduling, and the SEC was much more strategic about it. It looks like the Big Ten now is maybe getting a little bit more strategic about it as well.
And it's about time. I'm just looking. I think 4 of the Big Ten East teams have Indiana and Penn State back to back, and of course, only 5 of them can. But yeah, it's interesting like that. And then I also think it's about the inventory. You want as many quality games week to week as you can get. And so you may not want to stack stuff on top of each other. You spread it out, and then that evens it out through the course of the year. Because I'm just, as I look at the non-conference schedule, the first 4 weeks of the schedule, there's all kinds of interesting games, but also some very interesting conference games mixed in. And so I think there's a lot to like about the entire schedule, even before you get into the Big Ten play, where all kinds of chaos is going to happen. So I think it's really well done. You remember the initial schedule that we got last year after things were canceled and brought back, and you had all these the 4 bye weeks or whatever, and it was like really well thought out and really well planned. And this one feels like I think it was done by the same person or the same computer. I think it flows better, and there's a lot to like. And even as we mentioned just before we started the show, even having Illinois and Nebraska kick the season off in week 0 for no reason, just here, have it. It's free, take it, enjoy it, and then next week, then things are really going to get going.
Yeah, you've got free bonus football on August 28th, I think that would be, and then the week after that, you've got Iowa and Indiana, Minnesota, Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin. Like, that's a heck of a week 1 for the Big Ten. And you go through the schedule, week 2, Ohio State plays Oregon, Michigan plays with Washington. Mm-hmm. Week 3, you've got Indiana, Cincinnati, which is like all of a sudden kind of a really interesting game. Nebraska, Oklahoma, which will be like, well, look at these helmets. They used to play a lot. That'll be fun to watch for 3 minutes. But
Penn State, Auburn.
Penn State, Auburn. And boy, we can talk about Penn State's schedule. I had not looked ahead at Penn State's schedule before this, and boy, howdy. Penn State opens at Wisconsin. And they get Ball State at home. Then they have Auburn at home. Then they have Villanova. Then they have Indiana at home and at Iowa. Like, it is not out of the realm of possibility that Penn State could have 4 losses before their bye week. That is a brutal schedule. And then you go through the back end of the schedule. It's, home for Illinois, at Ohio State, at Maryland, home for Michigan, home for Rutgers, at Michigan State. But boy, for a program that is struggling in the recruiting trail right now, like Penn State is, that is a schedule that could lead to a whole lot of not very good momentum for them. We just saw them start 0-5. Like, this could be another year where you're a couple weeks into the season and all of a sudden Penn State looks like things are not going real well for them.
Well, you just look at after the Ohio State game, it's on the road at Ohio State, and then they go to Maryland. And for Maryland, this is a rivalry game. Maryland is beating Penn State on the recruiting trail, but now they need to beat them on the football field. And getting Penn State at home, following a game where Ohio State takes a lot out of teams. They put so much into it, and sometimes we see where teams lose to Ohio State twice. Basically, they let Ohio State beat them twice because the next game gets them as well. And so you got to be careful of that one. And then right after that, they host Michigan. And whether it's the Cade McNamara era or the J.J. McCarthy era, Michigan is going to be, well, I guess you don't know. But, that is another rivalry game for Penn State. And so it's going to be a stretch right in there, 3 games that aren't going to be easy. And who knows whether or not they've decided to quit based on how those first 6 games went.
Yeah, that's always a concern when you start real slowly and you come into a year with high expectations and those expectations get shot. I think we're both assuming that there will probably be less moving around of games within the course of the season than there was in 2020. You would hope with vaccines and other advances that things are probably not quite as hectic as they were a year ago. There's only one bye week built into the schedule, and it's interesting to see where it falls. Michigan State is one of the few teams that has 2 really difficult games back to back in the East. They end at Ohio State and home for Penn State, but they get a bye week before Michigan, and Michigan has to play Northwestern the week before that Michigan State game. I think Michigan State fans are probably looking at that and rubbing their hands together with glee, because that's the one, that is the one that is circled on their schedule every year. And if they come in with off a bye week and Michigan has to play always kind of a pain in the butt Northwestern team the week before, that is probably a decent advantage for them. As I mentioned, Ohio State gets a bye week before Indiana and Penn State. Is there anything on here that you look at and you think that's a trap game? That's a real dangerous spot for them. Is there anything that kind of jumped out to you on the schedule, or not? Not really.
For Ohio State,
for anyone,
for anybody. Yeah, I don't know if I've looked at it that closely yet, but Ohio State going on the road to Indiana after bye week, where you think, yeah, well, they'll be fine. They've got the bye week. But still, you still have to go in and execute. I think they'll be okay there. I'm just looking. Nobody has a bye week prior to Ohio State, so I think that helps the Buckeyes, and that some of those trap games may not be there or be as readily available. But no, I think I don't know if trap is the right word for Ohio State next year, because they won't be as good. So I think they need to take their opponents more seriously. Not that they didn't last year, but maybe us talking about it need to take the games more seriously and give the opponents more credit. I don't know. Do you see? I mean, what is a trap for you? I think is Nebraska sneaky? I don't know.
I don't know that I see a real trap game on Ohio State's schedule. I mean, at Indiana, Penn State back to back is a little, that's a little bit of a kind of keep an eye on it thing. It helps that at Minnesota and then at Oregon at home, it helps that Ohio State that Minnesota game is a Thursday game, not a Saturday game, so you got a couple extra days, which helps in the preparation for that Oregon game. I'm going to give you one. This is going to sound crazy. Hear me out. Kent State at Iowa, week 3. Hear me out. Hear me out. Sean Lewis and the Golden Flashes. This is not the Kent State that comes into Ohio State and loses 66-0. Like that is not what Kent State is anymore. Sean Lewis has built a pretty good program up there. Here are the 2 weeks before that for Iowa. Ready? Home for Indiana, at Iowa State. So that sure seems like a game where you're coming. I mean, that Iowa State game is always just an absolute dumpster fire, and they throw everything into it, and it ends up being a terrible, low-scoring game most years. The week after that, to have a MAC team coming in, and you're all beat up after 2 tough opponents, keep an eye on it. Just keep an eye on it. I guess the only other thing that is kind of intriguing to me is, I mean, you've got some big name non-conference teams, and this is this is not new. This is just, hey, we haven't really looked at this yet. So Auburn going to Penn State, Oregon coming to Ohio State, Washington going to Michigan, Notre Dame going to Wisconsin. These are all Big Ten home games. Oregon State at Purdue? No, probably not going to include that one in there. Okay.
Oklahoma, Nebraska.
Oklahoma, Nebraska at Oklahoma. That one's a road game. But,
Yeah.
I mean, this is a year where, there's always the, conference narrative that gets built around the non-conference season. Those are some big teams in the Big Ten that have a chance to maybe make a little bit of a statement earlier in the year. Michigan is not in a super fantastic place right now, but Washington is still kind of building right now. They did not have a great year of recruiting. This is just Jimmy Lake's second year up there. So this is, they're not quite at full power yet. Oregon, Ohio State, obviously a very intriguing game. That's a very young Ohio State, quarterback, but they've got a pretty good offense overall. That should be a pretty good one. You got Auburn with a first-year coach coming into Penn State. You got Notre Dame. I'm not sure what to expect out of Notre Dame yet, but you've got, they're going into Camp Randall. That is a chance for the Big Ten. You go 3-1, you go 4-0 in those games. That's a chance to have the sort of narrative setting for the whole season kind of laid out for you pretty early and be in a position to maybe have some more favorable discussion about you later on in the year in the playoff conversation.
And it can go absolutely the other way. And I'm looking at week 3 as Minnesota goes to Colorado, Nebraska goes to Oklahoma, Northwestern goes to Duke, Purdue goes to Notre Dame, Indiana hosts Cincinnati, Michigan State goes to Miami, Penn State hosts Auburn. I could see the Big Ten getting swept. Not that I'm not saying they will, but you can see them losing each of those games, and then boom, the Big Ten is written off, except for the teams that didn't lose. And I'm not sure how many of those games the Big Ten will even be favored in. Maybe Indiana, and maybe Penn State, maybe. And so it will be interesting to see how those narratives are written, and then can they bounce back? Wisconsin beats Notre Dame the next week in Madison. Does that help? And as I went through each week, it's just like, ooh, week 1, I really like it. Ooh, week 2, ooh, week 3, week 4. There's some really interesting non-conference games peppered in by all of these conference games from week 0 to week 12, 13, I guess it would be. And just really looking forward to it, Tom. No, I'm not going to wish summer away, but when I look outside and it's cold as heck and covered in snow and ice, may I at least wish winter away.
You can wish winter away. Yes. Well, you can wish us ahead to spring football. That's permissible. One last thing. Let's just run through Wisconsin's schedule right now, because this is about as front loaded as schedules get. The back end is not too bad, but boy, it is rough going through about the middle of October. Wisconsin, home for Penn State. Then you get Eastern Michigan at home, so that'll be a win. But home for Notre Dame, home for Michigan, at Illinois, and then Army. Why are you scheduling a service academy? Why? Why are you doing that to yourself in the middle of the schedule? Their bye is week 3. That's a terrible idea. That is a lot of bad ideas all strung in a row there for Wisconsin. And I'm sure Notre Dame people will be thrilled that Wisconsin has a bye week the week before Notre Dame. But after that, Notre Dame, Michigan, at Illinois, Army, at Purdue, home for Iowa, at Rutgers, home for Northwestern, home for Nebraska, at Minnesota. That is a brutal schedule. That is going to be one beat up team. If Ohio State does face Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game, that is going to be a beat up Wisconsin team by the time they get through that schedule. Yeah,
I'm just looking at Wisconsin. Was that Army game moved? Because why would you schedule that in the middle of the season? So I don't know. I apologize. I didn't look at Wisconsin's schedule well enough before all of these changes to know if that Army game was put there, as part of all of their moves, and they couldn't put it in week 3 or whatever. But again, our position in all of our podcasts is don't schedule the service academies, and especially in the middle of conference play. It just doesn't make any sense. And then they've got to deal with that. And it's, yeah, they've got some issues because although, Tom, I will say it's probably the greatest home ticket Wisconsin has ever had.
That
I
is
mean,
a yeah.
it's ridiculous. And the only thing missing is Ohio State, but even getting, Northwestern and Nebraska and Iowa, Michigan, Notre Dame, Penn State, Army. I mean, that's uh, hopefully the fans are the stands are full, but that's an incredible home ticket for Badger fans. You just wonder if they can handle all of those teams because I mean, Wisconsin should be pretty good, but that's a pretty serious schedule.
Yeah, that's going to probably be something that costs them a game or two down the line that it shouldn't, just because they're going to be so beat up. And there was a conversation at one point about should Ohio State and Michigan flip the home seasons. One of the arguments against that would be then you've got Penn State and Michigan at home in the same year, which then means the year after that you have them both on the road, which from a competitive perspective, that puts you in a tough spot. It also means from a ticket selling perspective, that season ticket the year that those teams are not at home is not nearly as attractive as it is when you can either sell, like this year, it's Oregon and Penn State at home, and then next year Michigan's at home. That makes it a little easier to sell those season ticket packages than it would if they were stacked together. Any other observations, or have we bled this one dry?
No, I will say you asked me for the trap game, and I guess I would go with the Penn State at Maryland that I talked about a little bit earlier, coming off that Ohio State road game. So I'll be waiting patiently for that one. I think that's in the early November. So, but I'll be watching many games before then as well that I'll be interested in.
That's a very good one because it's at Ohio State, then at Maryland, and then home for Michigan. So it's a sandwich game, and it's also the second of back-to-back road games in late October, early November. And Penn State will undoubtedly be throwing pretty much everything they have into that Ohio State game, and the Maryland game. Even after having lost to Maryland, that's still not a game I think Penn State takes super seriously. So,
although
that's another good one.
Yeah, at that point in the season, Maryland is usually on their fifth quarterback, though, so we'll have to see how things go. And they've already lost, guys to the portal as well, and who knows how many they'll lose to the portal during the season.
Always exciting drama. And I did overlook one team that does get Michigan and Ohio State back to back. That's Rutgers, but that's not a Big Ten team, so it's not really part of this conversation. So thank you guys all for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. Make sure you check out all of our other great podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Spreaker. You can just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. There's also a pretty significant Ohio State basketball game coming up tonight. Speaking of Maryland, so you can check out Buckeye Scoop to find great coverage of all of that. We will probably be talking some hoops tomorrow morning, would be my guess. But should be an exciting week at Buckeye Scoop and an exciting month as we head towards spring football. The number one player in the nation still out there waiting to sign with someone. Ohio State very much in the mix there. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on right now at BuckeyeScoop.com. Consider signing up and becoming a member there today. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.